Team Fortress 2. It's finally playable, guys! Returning to this game after a long bot-induced hiatus feels like coming home to a long-lost family friend. And that's not even mentioning these amazing new maps. Like Embargo, oh, it's just so good. All the custom new voice actors.
A casino is for customers. So making sure you understand. Don't touch anything!
Oh, it's amazing. I'll be disappointed if these go away after the summer. So, to celebrate Tf2 rising from the dead, I thought I'd make a video turning some of this game's most beloved items into magic items for your Dungeons & Dragons games. And since I'm making a D&D video, I know at least one of you fellow gamers, Masonic knows, is going to be watching this. And so, I'm just going to say it, I'd want to play more D&D, but I'm kind of burnt out on 5e. It's just too much prep work. If anyone has suggestions for a lightweight TTRPG, feel free to leave that in the comments. Anyways, without further ado, let's give each of the classic classes one magic item from their kit. And while we're at it, why not classify each of the TF2 mercs into a D&D class? Because, that feels like something you'd find on YouTube. Starting from left to right, we've got Scout. Now, Scout is definitely a rogue, and I'm not just saying that because there's a rogue subclass called Scout. Scout's greatest strength is his speed, allowing him to dodge attacks as well as pick and choose his battles, rushing up and retreating whenever he wants. And similarly, the rogue has bonus action, disengage, and dash, as well as two very specific I can dodge good abilities in the form of uncanny dodge and evasion. Now, Scout as a rogue might sound silly since rogues are, known for their skill and expertise, and Scout isn't exactly graceful.
Hey there, good looking. I got a bucket of chicken.
But remember, rogues don't have to put their expertise into stealth and sleight of hand or thieves' tools. It just so happens that not a single 5e rogue player has ever not picked stealth and thieves' tools as their expertises. Meanwhile, Scout has his two expertises into athletics and acrobatics. Athletics? What? I hear you cry. Scout has noodle arms. He's weak. That doesn't make any sense. Sure, but think about it for a second. He runs fast, that's athletics. He can double jump, again, jumping athletics. And not only does he manage to escape the heavy's grapple in Meet the Scout, but he actually manages to grapple the heavy himself in that same video. That's impressive, make no mistake. Do not underestimate the Twinks of Boston. And, oh yeah, in terms of subclass, I'd say Thief, since they get better climbing and jumping, as well as bonus action item, which, most DMs will let you use a health potion as a bonus action anyway. And D&D's action economy is really, really stupid, but the theme of use random item really fast is a core part of many of Scout's secondaries, like the sodas, the Mad Milk, and the Cleaver. For his magic item, I'm going with Bonk Atomic Punch. Now, one might see a drink that makes attacks that hit you actually miss and think, wait, isn't that just a haste potion? Well, yeah. So I thought, hey, why not make an extreme version of the haste potion and make it way too OP? And that's the thing about potions. If they're OP, just make them rare. Give your party only one, and they have to think really hard about when to use something that contains 9 kilograms of sugar and 400 milligrams of caffeine. Upon drinking the BAP, the consumer gains Mega Haste, turning their armor class to 25, unless it's somehow already higher than that. I don't know how you get an AC that high, though. The drinker also gets triple movement speed and automatic success on all dexterity saving throws. And 3 actions per turn! Now, obviously that's extremely overpowered, and in-game the bonk doesn't allow you to attack while used. For D&D, I think I can justify a similar effect as it's really hard to do anything precise while this zooped up on caffeine, so we can give the wielder disadvantage on all melee attacks, automatic failure on all ranged attacks that can't cast spells while under its effects, or perform precise actions like sleight of hand. Also, while the 1 minute timer is up, the drinker is knocked unconscious for an hour and takes 2 levels of exhaustion. 1 D&D's exhaustion that just gives you a negative to everything. It's way better designed. To me, this is way more fun and extreme than TF2's bonk, which I personally find pretty boring. It just turns off fighting for both sides, and it's not that great. With this extremo haste potion though, the upsides are extremely extreme. You can use it for an important boss battle or to escape some grave danger, but if you can't get out of that danger within a 1 minute window, you are screwed with that hour of unconsciousness and exhaustion. Soldier. Fighter seems like an obvious pick for Soldier. There isn't really a good way to get the bazooka equivalent into 5e without casting Fireball or at least Chromatic Orb, so this does feel a little underwhelming. However, his supportive abilities like the Disciplinary Action and the Banners can sort of be equivocated with the Battlemaster's Rally, Reposition, and maybe even Commander Strike. For his magic item, the Battalion's Backup. Upon blowing this magic horn, you and up to 5 allies of your choosing who can hear the horn's sound gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, and fire, and force damage for 1 minute. Once used, this item loses its magic and becomes a mundane bugle until its magic is recharged at the dawn of each day. This is pretty straightforward and works like a lot of magic items in D&D, and it buffs the whole party equally, so your players won't be fighting over who gets to loot goblin this one. I decided not to include the charged by dealing damage, because that just does not work in a TTRPG. It really encourages murder hoboing, and you can exploit it by like killing rats or something. Pyro. Artificer might make the most sense since his flamethrower is homemade after all, with a propane can and some duct tape. However, I went with Evocation Wizard for Pyro. It feels befitting since you typically see wizard hats on Pyro players, and Artificers don't get Thunderwave, and we gotta have Air Blast in our spell arsenal. Flare Gun is Firebolt, Gas Passer is the Grease Spell, Enhanced Leap is Thermal Thruster, Flaming Sphere is the Detonator, Long Strider for the Power Jack. A lot of Pyro's 2-kill feels like a spell list. For his magic item, the Rainblower. I think a brass instrument ranged weapon would be really cool in any kind of fantasy game. So, introducing the Rainblower. It's a ranged weapon with 20 feet of range, and yes, I converted the Source Engine's hammer units into feet, and the Flamethrower has a range of 21.25 feet. While maybe a martial weapon, proficiency in performance, or musical instruments I guess, will also make you proficient in using this weapon, and you can opt to use your charisma as its attribute instead of the usual dexterity. I opted not to include Air Blast since with these two gimmicks it's already a unique enough item. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention its damage, which is a 1d8 radiant. Demo Man. Demo Man. He's the easiest to categorize, since he's the pioneer of medieval mode after all. And Demo Man is obviously a Spellblade Warlock. With high enough level, you could also say he's multi-classed into fighter, but yeah, he literally wields a cursed sword that wants heads. This is prime Warlock material. You can even represent his explosive through Warlock spells like Eldritch Blast! And you can even get sticky bombs with Glyph of Warding if you really want to. In terms of giving him a magic item, Demo Man's items convert into a medieval RPG game a little too easily. Like, I could just make a shield that makes you take less fire and force damage when worn, call it the Charge and Charge, and call it a day, but that would just be really boring. Instead, Demo's item will be the Ulapul Caber. Trouble is, how do we get players to swing it like a melee weapon? After all, it is technically a grenade, and the canon explanation for its in-game usage is that a sober man would throw it. It's simple. Our game takes place in a setting where humanity had modern tech like grenades, but that was eons ago, and now ancient skeletons roam deep underground in ruins guarding their tanks and rifles. And the Caber is haunted by the spirits of dead soldiers. The Caber deals 5d6 force damage when detonated in a 20-foot radius with a DC 15 dex save for half damage, like most explosions in D&D. However, if the Caber is thrown, the user makes an attack roll. And if they aren't targeting a creature, we'll say they got a roll of 14 or higher, and on a miss, the Caber flies back to you like a boomerang and explodes. I think this is definitely an item more for the GM to use rather than the players. We're getting into world-building territory by this point, but I think it'd be really cool to have undead soldier skeletons charge the party like Tf2 Caber Knights in this hypothetical World War I themed dungeon that the party is going through. Heavy weapons guy. Considering his unarmed strikes, you might think he's a monk, but monks have low HP and use speedy hit-and-run tactics. Well, that's quite the opposite of the heavy's role. No, heavy's definitely a barbarian, and hey, would you look at that, Tasha's Cauldron has a barbarian subclass that lets you deal good unarmed damage. Sure, it's through using claws, but oh hey, would you look at that, it's the warrior spirit. Bonus points if you take the chef feat and feed your party sandwiches. For his magic item, it's a no-brainer, the Holiday Punch. While warned, unarmed critical strikes deal no damage and instead cause the targeted creature to suffer the effects of Tasha's hideous laughter, with the spell save's DC being 20, which is pretty high, but you know, you had to land a crit in order to get this thing's effects, so I think it's befitting. This one slides from Tf2 to D&D very nicely. Both systems have random crits, and it makes for a really funny item that I think most players would really appreciate. I could definitely see a monk going buck wild and destroying your encounters with this thing, though. Engineer. To no one's surprise, Engie is an artificer artillerist. That's kind of a mouthful. You get a turret, it shoots things, it's a separate entity from you, and if that wasn't enough, once you get access to 4th level spells, you get access to the Summon Construct spell. Cure Wounds and Create Food and Water are for your dispenser spells, and unfortunately there's not really much for teleporters. Also, Artificial Limb Infusion if you want the Gunslinger. You might think there's nothing in his kit that's befitting of a D&D game, but if you ask me, I think the Rescue Ranger should be allowed in medieval mode. It shoots bolts. I mean, this thing is just a crossbow that looks like a gun, okay? So for D&D, I gave it the stats of a short bow. It counts as a simple weapon, so artificers can use it. Now the kicker is that when your bolts that this thing shoots hits an object, the Mending spell is cast on it. And Mending's one of those spells where you, the user, can kind of decide what happens. It's pretty open-ended, which I like, and can make for some cool things. Maybe you shoot a bridge to repair it so you can walk across it. I don't know. It's up to you, it's up to the GM. Additionally, if you hit something with the construct tag, it is healed for 1d6 hit points. Now, healing in D&D is supposed to be very limited. After all, it'd be pretty lame if you got this thing and your party had a Warforged in it and the Rescue Ranger didn't heal them, which is why I'll say that it uses rare repair bolts that cost 20 gold, since that's how much Smith's tools cost, and it's only crafted by a select few magical tinkerers, but if you have Smith's Tools proficiency yourself, you can spend a day of downtime to craft 4 bolts for free. Medic. While clerics may be the primary healers of D&D, Medic is absolutely not a cleric. He's about as godless as you can get, especially if you've read the comics. Now, he's an artificer. While a Medic artificer may not be able to use Uber Charge, you can still cast a wide variety of support spells like Sanctuary, Enhanceability, Aid, Odaluk's Resilient Sphere, and Intellect's Fortress, in addition to just spamming Cure Wounds. Alchemist subclass makes the most sense, since it gets you more healing spells. However, you could take the Battlesmith for that sweet, sweet Crusader's crossbow spam. And speaking of, you know, when choosing something from Medic's loadout to make medieval, the obvious answer is the Crusader's crossbow. Syringe guns are too futuristic, same with the Mediguns, the bone saws, they're just swords, and the Solemn Vows see enemy health feature, it really shouldn't be tied to an item in a TTRPG. I think either your GM tells you enemy health or they don't, and that's just kind of a preference you as a table come together on. And you know, we already made a ranged healing thing with our last entry, so I think we gotta get a little more creative. Introducing the D&D's Vitasaw. But nerd peel, there's no Uber Charge in D&D, and even if there was, keeping it on death, that's stupid. And yes, exactly. That's why I'm taking some major creative liberties with the Vitasaw. The Vitasaw is a simple, one-handed melee weapon that deals 1d4 piercing damage. But on a hit, you can force a target to make a Constitution saving throw of 8 plus your medicine score. And if they fail, you can draw their blood for an additional 1d4 piercing damage. Of course, not all creatures have blood, you know, like a skeleton. Some might have bodily fluids, but not take damage from extracting it, like a zombie, for example. So, yeah, just use your logic, you know? You can then inject this blood into another creature to heal them for an amount equal to this weapon's damage roll. And if you're healing something with the Vitasaw, no, you don't have to deal melee damage to heal them. That'd be pretty stupid. And again, healing in 5e needs to be very limited, so you can only use this weapon to heal people a number of times per long rest equal to your medicine skill, which is kind of a lot to keep track of, but whatever. You can also fill up the Vitasaw with any liquid of your choosing, from potions to oils to spells to acids, you name it. Well, maybe not anything. Lava, for example, might cause the thing to melt, but the point is, you can also use this as an injector for any liquid, so get creative. Sniper. Sniper is a ranger, and not just because he has a bow. Fighters can use bows too. No, the real reason Sniper is a ranger is because he canonically lives in a van and is a great woodsman with great camping and survival skills. You just never get to see them because Tf2 gameplay is strictly limited to just a murder fest. So we never get to see those skills shine. I mean, look, he even managed to skin a crocodile for one of his secondaries. So yeah, Hunter subclass seems pretty befitting. Now, when picking a sniper weapon to put in the game, obviously the most iconic sniper weapon is Jarate. If your D&D players are as psychotic as mine, they'll be jumping with joy at the chance to throw piss at their enemies. Once thrown, this jar bursts into a liquid splash that coats all creatures within a 10-foot radius in Jarate. Creatures coated in Jarate take an additional 1 poison damage anytime they take damage from any other source. Jarate dries off 12 seconds after being coated, which is 2 rounds of combat. 1 additional damage is pretty weak. Compare that to Tf2's Jarate, which is very strong. But when you consider the fact that spells like Hunter's Mark and Hex are considered pretty good despite only boosting damage dealt by 1 player against 1 enemy, low bonus damage seems very applicable. The only problem I foresee with adding Jarate to Dungeons & Dragons is that piss isn't exactly a rare item to get, and nobody asked for and nobody wants the needs mechanics from The Sims to be added into 5e. Nobody wants that module, okay? So if you actually wanted Jarate to be an item in your Dungeons & Dragons games, I would recommend making it something like Monster Blood instead. That way they have to defeat a creature, maybe butcher it, use some survival or crafting or medicine or nature skills, and that way it's a little more special and it actually has to be earned. Finally, we have the Spy. Spy is pretty obviously a rogue, and for subclass, you'll have to go Arcane Trickster if you want the invisibility and disguise self spells, which I feel like rogues should have easier access to those abilities. Like, considering wizards get those 2 extremely roguey spells at much earlier levels than one specific rogue subclass, it means a wizard might actually be a better sneaky trickster than your actual rogue, but that's a 5e complaint for another day. In the meantime, take your expertise in deception and stealth, obviously. The Spy Sickle is a dagger that deals 1d4 cold damage instead of your usual piercing. When this weapon drops a creature to 0 hit points, the target does not die, but is instead frozen for 1d4 decades, or until thawed out by intense heat. Creatures who carry the Spicicle on their person have resistance to fire damage, but upon receiving fire damage, the wearer must roll a d20, and on a 6 or lower, the Spicicle melts, forever destroyed. Personally, I'm proud of the freezing mechanic. I think, defeating a villain, putting them in cryo-sleep, and then they come back 40 years later. Perhaps you get this item from a villain who kidnaps people and leaves them frozen in his freezer forever, and you, the heroes, must stop them. Or maybe your players are murder hobos and they use it to create their own ice sculpture statue of human beings. Who knows? I think there's a lot of fun, unique potential with that one little mechanic. Now sure, we may have 1 magic item for each of the 9 classes, but it still feels like an important, integral part of the game's culture is missing. That's right, we can't make a D&D magic items video with talking about TF2's most magical items of all, the ghostly gibbous. This cursed top hat decreases your situational awareness when worn, giving you disadvantage on all perception checks against ambushes. However, you, the GM, should be rolling passive perception for ambushes, so the wearer does not know of this stat. I think that's a core integral part of the ghostly gibbous. After all, unaware players equip it, thinking that they have free new amazing drip, when in reality they're clueless newbies, wearing the hat that everyone else has. Similarly, I think you should also incentivize players to actually wear this hat. Maybe don't tell them about its downside, but do tell them about its upside of measly +1 to persuasion checks when worn. And of course, things like the Identify spell will reveal the true nature of the ghostly gibbous. So there you have it, folks, a whole slew of TF2's finest items to put in your D&D games. That's all I got, but before you go, I would humbly ask that you wishlist my upcoming Steam game, 789. It's a silly, quote-unquote, horror game where you find out why 6 was afraid of 7. That's all for this video. I bid you a good day.